Hi, my name is John. I've been a director of photography for the past 20 years. I'm now based in Atlanta, Georgia, but I work across the US. I started off as a video journalist for the Associated Press back in the early 2000s, and I'm now focused on being a director of photography with a camera package, some light, and sound. I shoot mostly unscripted content for TV shows such as Top Gear in the BBC or The Open Road for Nat Geo, but also shoot corporate content, documentaries, and news.
Good evening, Julie. Good to see you. Today, one of the biggest takeaways, biggest moments was seeing the Markel family witness justice.
This past week, I was on assignment in Tallahassee, Florida for Court TV. So we had an OB truck who covered the Adelson trial, and I was shooting hits from outside the courthouse and news packages with the correspondent. Luckily for us, this time, production has managed to secure parking meters, so we don't have to worry about parking too far when we're setting up. In the setup we're going to be using for the live hits, we've had two Nan lights, 300, Forza 300B. I'm running the lights off the Precon 2000, which delivers power for at least 10 to 15 hours. So more than enough to shoot all the live hits and run the lights, especially in the evening where you don't need as much power. I'm also using the Sony FS5. Mounted on the FS5, I have the Small HD Ultra 5. I'm looping the signal from the camera through the Small HD and into the LiveU, which allows me to monitor the picture quality and make sure I avoid this green tint coming out from Sony cameras. So far, I'm pretty happy with this setup. I also mounted the LiveU directly on the camera, which makes it a lot easier when I go running gun shoulder held. I'm set up outside the courthouse. It's a very simple setup, two lights and some shade. At nighttime, I'm looking for good backgrounds, which is not easy because a lot of buildings aren't lit up. So here I'm testing out the background with the Florida Capitol in the back. And the main goal here is to make sure everything is set up when the correspondent arrives, usually a few minutes before the hit. And we have an interesting background with some color, some lights, which makes the correspondent really pop out from the background.
Court TV legal correspondent Julie Janae joining us live from outside the courthouse in Tallahassee, Florida tonight, Friday night in Tallahassee for Julie Janae. All right.
And here I want to talk a bit more about hair light. I've been playing around with the hair light mainly because it's a lot trickier. The key light is easy, you just set it at the correct exposure, but when you're setting the hair light, you want to make sure that you're obviously below that exposure, probably a stop and a half under the correct exposure. We want the hair light to create separation between the correspondent and the background, but also maintain the detail on the top of her hair. Keep in mind, I'm a one-man band here, and I'm using the FS300 as a hair light, which can be tricky. Now, looking at this now, I have good exposure on her face. Her hair light has detail, but also separation, and it looks subtle. The hair light should feel correct in terms of exposure, and even though it's underexposed. Here I want to come back to the LiveU. You remember I mentioned how I positioned it directly on the camera instead of hanging on the sticks. And I'm quite happy with that position right now. Allows me to quickly look at it and check the monitor at the same time. During that week, Julia did some remote anchoring. Remote anchoring is simply anchoring outside the studio. So I set up the teleprompter to run on a laptop just under the lens. And she had another laptop in front of her with the show return. The good part of running the background for the lights is even though we remote anchored for around 90 minutes with the two FS300 at 80%, we barely use 15% of the power. So I'm curious to know, do you guys shoot news outdoors or corporate talking heads? And how do you set yourself up?